The night shift at St. Gabriel's Hospital always felt longer than the day. The fluorescent lights hummed, the halls echoed with distant beeps, and the city outside seemed a world away. For Nurse Maribel Reyes, these hours were sacred, a time when her compassion mattered most, when the world's forgotten found a gentle hand. Maribel was known for her warmth and her stubbornness. She'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood, the daughter of immigrants, and she carried her mother's lessons in her heart. Do what's right, even when it's hard. She wore her curly hair in a bun, her scrubs always a little wrinkled, her smile quick and genuine. On a rainy Tuesday, Maribel's world changed. She was assigned to the ER, where a young man named Jamal Carter was brought in, barely conscious. He was 23, a college student, and he'd collapsed at work. His chart said, "No insurance." The attending physician, Dr. Hargrove, glanced at the file and sighed. "Stabilize him, but don't go overboard. We can't admit everyone." Maribel's jaw clenched. She saw the fear in Jamal's eyes, the way his hands shook. She checked his vitals, heart racing, blood pressure dropping, skin clammy. She knew the signs: sepsis, a deadly infection. He needed IV antibiotics, fluids, and close monitoring. But the hospital's new policy was clear. Uninsured patients got minimal care, then discharge. She pleaded with Dr. Hargrove. "He's in septic shock. If we send him home, he'll die." Hargrove shrugged. "Our hands are tied. If you want to keep your job, follow protocol." Maribel looked at Jamal, at his mother waiting in the hall, her face etched with worry. She made a choice. When Hargrove left, Maribel slipped into the supply room. She started the full sepsis protocol: IV antibiotics, fluids, oxygen. She called in a favor from a friend in the lab to rush Jamal's blood work. She stayed by his side, monitoring every change, whispering encouragement. "You're not alone," she told him. "I'm not letting you go." Hours passed. Jamal's fever broke. His breathing eased. Maribel's relief was short-lived. The next morning, the hospital administrator, Ms. Kincaid, called her into the office. "You violated policy," Kincaid said, her tone icy. "You used resources on a patient who wasn't approved for admission. You put your job, and this hospital, at risk." Maribel didn't flinch. "I saved his life." Kincaid's lips thinned. "That's not your call to make." She was suspended, pending investigation. Word spread quickly. Some colleagues whispered support, others avoided her. Jamal's mother, Mrs. Carter, tried to thank Maribel, but security escorted her out. The story might have ended there, but Jamal's recovery was a miracle. He wrote about his experience on social media, describing Maribel's kindness and the hospital's coldness. The post went viral. News outlets picked up the story. Protesters gathered outside St. Gabriel's, demanding justice for Maribel and for patients like Jamal. Maribel watched from her apartment, torn between fear and pride. She missed her patients, her purpose. She worried about paying rent, about her reputation, but she knew she'd done the right thing. She received letters from strangers, nurses, patients, families, sharing their own stories of compassion and injustice. The hospital doubled down, releasing a statement defending their policy. "We must balance compassion with fiscal responsibility," Kincaid said on the evening news. The backlash was swift. Doctors and nurses threatened to strike. Donors pulled funding. The board called an emergency meeting. Jamal and his mother led a march to the hospital, carrying signs that read, Patience Over Profits, and Justice for Maribel. Maribel joined them, her head held high. She spoke to the crowd, her voice trembling but strong. Healthcare is a human right. No one should have to choose between saving a life and keeping a job. The board relented. Maribel was reinstated, and the hospital announced a review of its policies. Kincaid resigned. Dr. Hargrove apologized, admitting he'd lost sight of his oath. Maribel returned to work, greeted by cheers and hugs. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she'd sparked a movement. Jamal visited her in the ER, healthy and grateful. "You saved me," he said. Maribel smiled. "You saved me, too." She realized that courage wasn't just about breaking rules. It was about standing up for what mattered, even when the world said no. Maribel's return to St. Gabriel's was met with applause, but also with wary glances from hospital leadership. She knew her actions had made her a symbol, but also a target. Still, she walked the halls with her head high, determined to care for her patients as she always had. The ER felt different now, charged with a sense of possibility, but also tension. Jamal's story continued to spread. News crews camped outside the hospital, interviewing staff and patients. Maribel was asked to appear on local radio, where she spoke about the moral conflict nurses face every day. "We're taught to save lives, not to check insurance first," she said. Her words resonated with listeners, many of whom shared their own stories of being denied care. Inside the hospital, change was slow. Some doctors quietly thanked Maribel for her courage, while others grumbled about the attention. Ms. Kincaid's replacement, Mr. Patel, called a staff meeting. "We're reviewing all patient care policies," he announced. "We want to hear from you." For the first time, nurses and aides felt their voices mattered. Maribel was invited to join the policy review committee. She hesitated, unsure if she could trust the process, but Jamal encouraged her. "You already changed my life," he said. "Now you can change the system." Maribel agreed, determined to fight for patients who couldn't fight for themselves. The committee meetings were heated. Some administrators argued that stricter policies were necessary to keep the hospital afloat. Maribel countered with stories of patients who'd been turned away, of families who'd lost loved ones because of bureaucracy. She spoke with passion, her voice trembling with emotion. "We can't call ourselves healers if we let people die for lack of paperwork." Meanwhile, Jamal became an advocate for healthcare reform. He spoke at rallies, wrote op-eds, and met with lawmakers. His story inspired others to demand change, not just at St. Gabriel's, but across the state. Maribel watched with pride as the young man she'd saved became a leader in his own right. But the backlash was real. Maribel received hate mail, accusing her of endangering the hospital. She was called reckless, irresponsible, even a traitor. Some nights she lay awake, wondering if she'd done the right thing. But then she'd remember Jamal's smile, the gratitude in his mother's eyes, and she'd find the strength to keep going. One evening, Maribel found a note in her locker. It was from a fellow nurse, Anna, who had always kept her distance. "Thank you for reminding me why I became a nurse," it read. "You gave us all hope." Maribel wept, realizing that her actions had touched more lives than she'd ever imagined. The hospital's board eventually voted to revise its policies. Uninsured patients would receive the same care as everyone else. Maribel was asked to help train staff on the new protocols. She accepted, knowing that real change required more than new rules. It required a new culture. Maribel's days became a whirlwind of training sessions, policy meetings, and long shifts in the ER. She worked with Mr. Patel to create workshops on empathy and patient advocacy. Nurses and doctors shared their own stories, some for the first time. The hospital began to feel less like a machine and more like a community. Patients noticed the difference. There were more smiles, more listening, more hope. Jamal visited often, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to speak to new staff about his experience. He and Maribel became friends, their bond forged in crisis, but strengthened by purpose. Jamal started a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses from underserved backgrounds, naming it after Maribel's mother, who had inspired her to care for others. But not everyone welcomed the changes. A small group of senior doctors resisted, claiming the new policies would bankrupt the hospital. Tensions flared at staff meetings. Maribel stood her ground, reminding everyone that their mission was to heal, not to profit. "We can't measure our success by the bottom line alone," she said. "We have to measure it by the lives we touch." One night, a severe storm hit the city. The ER was flooded with patients, some homeless, some uninsured, all in need. Maribel led her team with calm determination, triaging cases, comforting families, and making sure no one was turned away. When the power flickered and the backup generator failed, she organized a human chain to move patients to safety. After the storm, the hospital received a letter from the mayor, praising Maribel and her team for their heroism. The story made the news, and donations poured in from the community. The board, seeing the outpouring of support, finally understood what Maribel had been fighting for. They approved additional funding for patient care and staff training. Maribel's reputation grew beyond St. Gabriel's. She was invited to speak at nursing conferences, where she shared her story and encouraged others to stand up for their patients. She met nurses from across the country, many of whom faced the same struggles. Together, they formed a network of advocates determined to change healthcare from the inside out. Jamal's health continued to improve. He graduated from college and began working for a nonprofit focused on healthcare access. He and Maribel often spoke at events together, their story a testament to the power of compassion and courage. "One nurse changed my life," Jamal would say. "Imagine what we could do if we all cared a little more." Maribel's journey was far from over. There were still battles to fight, still patients to save, still hearts to change. But she knew she was not alone. She had found her voice, her purpose, and a community that believed in her. And she knew that no matter what, she would always choose to do what was right, even when it was hard.